morning, everyone. Lots of stuff going on. Just a little bit of Wuhan news. I haven't heard too much today. The numbers continue to rise. City TV News Toronto is reporting Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne said there was room for about 200 passengers aboard the flight from Wuhan. It's linking to the second plane carrying evacuees from Wuhan is on its way, and it landed. So it's landed at CFB Trenton. We're still evacuating people from the quarantine zone. That's something to note. Moving on, Canada's military wants to ban Huawei from 5G. Globe and Mail is reporting Canada's military wants the federal government to ban the Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei Technologies company from supplying equipment for the next generation of wireless infrastructure, according to senior Canadian official with knowledge of the matter. National security agencies, the military, and the Department of Innovation are conducting a cybersecurity review to determine whether Huawei's 5G technology would be a security risk to Canada. The review also examines the cost to consumers and major telecom carriers of restricting 5G equipment suppliers. The official, whom the Globe and Mail is not identifying because they are not authorized to discuss the subject publicly, said senior military leaders, including Canadian Forces Chief of Defense Staff General Jonathan Vance, have told senior levels of government they believe Huawei would threaten national security. The military believes Huawei is not a trusted vendor because its 5G equipment could be used for Chinese espionage or to disable critical infrastructure during an international crisis, the official said. It is also concerned that allowing Huawei into 5G could jeopardize security and cooperation with the United States and intelligence sharing among the Five Eyes partnership of Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. Daniel Lebouthier, sorry if I've got that wrong. I practiced it a few times and I flubbed it. Anyway, moving on. Head of Media Relations at the Department of National Defense said the military can't comment on the matter. Right now, Huawei gear is used only in the peripheral parts of the wireless network, not in the core where data traffic is managed. The federal cabinet has several options. The status quo plus tougher checks on Huawei's 5G wireless system, or an outright ban. John Turnbull, a retired brigadier general who worked in military signals intelligence, said the Defense Department would not be basing its recommendation on technical analysis, but on Canada's relationship with Washington. This Five Eyes relationship is pretty important to DND and to the military intelligence world, he said. I'm not sure how many people really understand 5G, but they do understand economics and they do understand power plays, and there are two big economic spheres of influence here. And when we are forced to pick a side, it tends to be with the U.S. for lots of excellent reasons that go well beyond IT security. Intelligence and cybersecurity officials in the United States and Australia are adamant that Huawei equipment anywhere in the network is an unacceptable security vulnerability. Washington has threatened to scale back sharing of highly classified intelligence with allies that allow Huawei gear in their 5G networks. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service also sees Huawei as a cybersecurity threat and wants it barred from 5G networks. The Globe reported in November that CSIS is at odds with the Communications Security Establishment, the electronic surveillance agency. CSE has said robust testing and monitoring of Huawei's 5G equipment can mitigate potential security risks, senior officials told the Globe. I scroll down. The Globe is not identifying the officials because they were not authorized to speak publicly on the matter. The United States and Australia have forbidden wireless carriers to use Huawei's 5G mobile technology. New Zealand has blocked one domestic telecom carrier's proposal to build a 5G network with Huawei equipment. Japan's three major telecom giants say they will exclude Huawei's gear. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson recently decided to give Huawei a limited role in its 5G networks. And this is me very quickly. I read a report saying Trump was none too pleased about that, and apparently there was a phone call and he told Boris. So back to the article. Like CSE, Britain's cybersecurity agency, government communication headquarters argued that Huawei's risk could be mitigated by keeping it out of the core of the network, testing its equipment and limiting the Chinese telecom to 35% of the periphery. The Americans and Australians say Huawei answers to China's ruling Communist Party and could be compelled to help Beijing spy on or sabotage Western networks. Chinese law says companies must, quote, support, cooperate with and collaborate in national intelligence work when asked. I scroll down a little bit more. A ban could saddle Canadian wireless carriers with hundreds of millions of dollars in extra costs and upgrades, industry officials say. Bell Canada and TELUS Communications, which use Huawei extensively in their existing networks, would have to remove and replace gear to accommodate a different supplier's equipment. Bell and TELUS want to use Huawei's 5G gear, while Rogers will use Sweden's Ericsson. So, interesting. I mean, I don't like Rogers either, right? I thought idly, oh, maybe I'll have to switch my cell phone provider. I have Virgin. I just use their data, and I use a VoIP provider, which is much cheaper than how they want you to do cell phones, and it works just fine. But the point of my statement is I could probably go and get a similar data thing from Rogers, but I don't like giving John Tory money. Like, that guy, come on, not a chance, right? Anyway, here is moving on. And I mean, I think this is all interesting. I think that the fact that it would cost so much money to change over Bell's system is telling. There's a lot of moving parts to this, right? It's not as easy as just ban it, but it probably should be, right? Probably should be. Saskatchewan farmers, I've reported before, have taken a 12% hit in their earnings due to the carbon tax. And this is just the first year. This is the $20 per ton. And there are a bunch of industries that are exempt from this. But I'm going to I apologize if it's not loud enough. I hope it's loud enough. But here we go. Here is the AG producer, Saskatchewan general manager, explain what he hopes will be the outcome of a review on the impact of the federal carbon tax will have on farmers. And I flubbed that too, but here we go.
We've been saying since the beginning of the discussion around carbon pricing that because producers can't pass along increased costs, they don't set the prices for their products. So they basically just have to swallow whatever extra costs come their way. That the federal government needed to take that under consideration. So they did exempt fuel that's used on farm. And when that happened, we said, okay, that's fine, but you're going to have these other additional costs that are going to get captured in the system, and it's going to be reasonably significant. So in this case, it's about $2 an acre this year, and it could go up over $5 and maybe $6 an acre after 2022. So that can have the impact of reducing your farm income by 8% this year and by as much as 12.5% in 2022. So I think for any of your viewers, a 12.5% reduction in your income is pretty important. And I think that they're saying that people will get some reimbursement from the credit. That's about $500 a household. So if you're comparing $15,000 that you're paying out and a $500 credit on the other side, it doesn't really make up for it. So we would like to engage a conversation with the federal government about exempting some of these other cost factors.
Okay, and I'll leave it there. The link is in the description. I want to show you, here's the grain drying. This is from the February 10th. That's yesterday. Today's the 11th. And this is the Western producer, right? Farmer-centric production. And it says compensation urged for carbon tax costs from grain drying. And this goes into it. I'm not going to get into it right now because if I do, I'll go long. Here's an example of an exemption in New Brunswick. New Brunswick powered to dodge major carbon taxes after Ottawa proposes looser rules on coal plants. This was in 2018. I remember Halloween 2018. And right, so it's okay if they need to maintain the price for general consumers in New Brunswick, but Alberta grain drying or Saskatchewan grain drying, sorry, man, you got to swallow those costs. Here's another interesting one. Muskrat Falls. I have a house in Newfoundland, and the politics out there is as interesting there as Ontario politics are here, right? Like they've got their own hot button issues, and Muskrat Falls is one of them. And I'll explain why. Here's a quick CBC story. It says Ottawa, Newfoundland to agree to cut financing costs of Muskrat Falls, but how isn't clear yet. The federal and provincial government said Monday that they have agreed on a plan for Newfoundland and Labrador's Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project aimed at keeping electricity rates affordable, but their finer points of accounting for a $30 billion funding gap over the coming decades has yet to be formalized. Quote, this is a very complex financial situation, Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Dwight Ball said Monday afternoon at the Signal Hill campus of Memorial University in St. John's. Okay, scroll down. Quote, we have a responsibility to keep our power rates stable, said Federal Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan, who's a member of Parliament for St. John's South Mount Pearl. Under the existing agreement, over the next 45 years, it would cost $74 billion to pay for Muskrat, a scenario that would eventually force retail power rates up to 78 cents per kilowatt hour from the current 13 cents. But that agreement which is backloaded and includes billions in what insiders say are unachievable dividends to the province, is being shredded. It will be replaced with a more traditional cost of service agreement expected to shave $34 billion in costs, which will be passed on to ratepayers. The savings, hopefully, not the costs. The new plan means annual costs will be relatively stable at between $600 and $800 million annually instead of rising dramatically in future years. But to keep rates stable around 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour, the province will have to cover off a $4.8 billion shortfall over the next 2 decades. That's where the details get a little murky, with both levels of government saying the details will be out in the coming months. Yes, they just got to work it out. I mean, it's an interesting story. You should read more if you're interested in that. It's a little wonky. It gets into policy, it gets into backroom deals, and like there's lots of interesting stuff. It's a hot button issue, but I'm going to leave it there. If you want to read more, link is in the description. Montreal Gazette is reporting Quebec to approve $1.1 billion cement plant without environmental review. Isn't that interesting? In Quebec, no problem. Opposition parties and environmentalists slammed the Colliard government on Thursday for greenlighting a $1.1 billion cement works project without a review by Quebec's Environmental Bureau. The McInnes cement plant in Port Daniel, Gassons in Gaspé, sorry if I've got that wrong, could top the list of industrial polluters in the province. The provincial government plans to exempt the project from an assessment by the Bureau des Audiences Publiques sur l'Environnement, BAPE, Quebec's Advisory Office of Environmental Hearings. The company has said the project shouldn't be subject to an environmental review because it was submitted in May 1995, a month before the law requiring such an assessment came into effect. In the National Assembly, Economy, Innovation and Expert Minister Jacques Doucette. No, it's not Doucette, but it's not something I'm going to pronounce correctly right now. So sorry about that, sir. Said, or madam, Jacques, sir, said the project, quote, isn't an environmental dossier, it's an economic dossier. The opposition greeted the remark with jeers. I scroll down. Quote, we know it's extremely polluting because of the materials it will use, but we don't have all the facts, so citizens can't make an informed decision on the issue, she said. The plant would release 1.7 million tons of greenhouse gases, GHG, per year, according to an evaluation by a Canadian engineering consulting firm. That greenhouse gas output would make it the #1 polluter in Quebec. So even though they haven't done the environmental assessment, somebody privately did the environmental assessment and said, definitely it's going to be the #1 polluter and they don't need an environmental assessment, no problem. That's Quebec. Here's Alberta. Teck Resources awaits Ottawa's decision on oil sands. Megamine wants to be carbon neutral by 2050. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it weird, right? Like how things are treated differently, east and west. Okay. Teck Resources Limited, this is Financial Post reporting, said on Monday it targets to be carbon neutral across all its operations by 2050 as the miner awaits the Canadian government's decision on the approval of the Frontier Oil Sands project. Teck's target, which align with Canada's commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. Moving the goalposts, everybody. Are you used to it yet? Net zero, net zero. Wait till we get to 2050 and we're not, and they'll change it. And it won't even take that long. They'll change it. They'll change it before 2025 or whatever. They'll have something else. Moving on, back to the article. Comes more than a month after the environmental minister said the government will take into account the country's climate plan when it considers approval of the Frontier project. At full capacity, the $20.6 billion, $15.55 billion US Frontier project could produce 260,000 barrels per day of bitumen in northern Alberta, making it one of the largest in the oil sands. All 14 nations and Métis communities that would be directly affected have signed agreements with Teck supporting the project. Other Indigenous groups staunchly oppose it, saying the impact of more oil moving across Western Canada affects many more communities. If Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government approves Frontier, it would jeopardize his promise over Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. Saying no could infuriate Alberta, which is already angry over perceived federal bias against the energy industry. Perceived? Canada also has the power to delay a decision on whether to approve the oil sands project. And yeah, so that's almost the end of this article. And here's an article from yesterday saying that the environment minister, CBC reporting, doesn't rule out deferring decision on the Teck oil sands mine. And I don't think I'm going to read all this. Maybe I will. Okay, yeah, I'll read this one. Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson said today he won't rule out deferring a decision on the proposed Teck Frontier oil sands mine. Quote, none of the options are off the table, Wilkinson told CBC's Power and Politics Monday evening. We will be taking into account all of the relevant information. CBC obtained a letter addressed to Wilkinson from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation In it, the First Nations suggested the Liberal cabinet take more time in deciding whether to permit the controversial oil sands mine to go forward. The band, located north of Fort McMurray, said it has environmental and cultural concerns that still need to be addressed. The letter doesn't explicitly ask the government to delay a decision on the fate of the mine. However, the First Nation says time is running out for Alberta to live up to its responsibility to consult on and accommodate its concerns. We are still talking with Alberta and remain hopeful that progress can be made from now until the end of February, the letter states. However, this seems increasingly unlikely with the prescribed timelines for final decision on the project. In July, a federal provincial environmental panel recommended the approval of the Tech Frontier mine. The $20.6 billion project from Vancouver-based Tech Resources would disturb 292 kilometers of pristine wetlands and boreal forest, an area, half the size of the city of Edmonton over its 40-year lifespan, although the whole area won't be mined at once. The federal cabinet has until the end of February to make a decision. Now, I wanted to read this paragraph specifically because of the way they're positioning this, right? The Vancouver-based miner will disturb 292 kilometers of pristine wetlands and boreal forests. Can you just see them in your mind's eye right now? How dare they, those miners? How dare they? An area half the size of Edmonton. Right? Clutch those pearls, everyone. The CBC as propagandist. Okay? I just wanted to illustrate that. Look at the use of language. Look at the use of imagery. Look at what they're trying to make you think about. Right? They're not trying to make you think about the jobs. They're not trying to make you think about the impact it could have financially in the area. They're not trying to help make you think about how long the approval process has been and that Teck has gotten the approval of all of the Indigenous bands. They're saying the pristine wetlands will be disturbed. Oh my goodness. Oh, goodness me. Unbelievable. Your press, your tax dollars at work. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com and CanadaReport.co, even though I don't update it as much as I should. Sorry. And have a wonderful, wonderful